It's day 2, government shutdown. Power's been out. Running the laptop and the camera just off of the batteries. I don't know how much time we got, maybe an hour, but it might be enough time to get the word out. We got to tell you why we have government shutdowns at all, how this one's going to end, and just kind of this weird thing as to how the Congress is supposed to check executive spending, and now it's just the other way around. I don't know what it is, but we got to get the word out. This is important. Stick with us.
Why is this happening?
I'm wearing the pajamas too, just sort of because I imagine a lot of government employees are going to be wearing pajamas these last couple days. I figured I might as well. Government shutdown season again, Joe, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about them. So kind of this past week, I did some reading on them. So our story begins, as all things should when discussing the government, with the sacred text, and you know what I'm talking about, the one that's been ordained by our fathers, of course. It's the Constitution. And they'll talk about Article 1, Section 9, say, quote, "No money shall be drawn from the treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law." Right? That's the power of the purse. But for the longest time, at the very beginning, the executive branch kind of ignored it. Like it really wasn't a thing. They sort of pushed it. And there's just like this long, rich, fun history of presidents and people in the administration kind of ignoring it. This starts even in the late 1700s. John Adams went around and he was appropriating funds to build frigates. But instead of using that money just to build them, he used them to build and operate them.
Sorry,
So
what is a frigate?
No, it's a kind of boat. It's kind of a military boat. It's a Navy boat.
Oh, of course.
Joe,
Frigates, yes.
Yeah. Washington did this. So, he even spent money without it being appropriated. That was in part to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion, which I'm sure you are very familiar with, having come in from Pennsylvania. And the way he did it, he just redirected funds from regular military accounts, kind of to put it down. He kind of justified it. Congress wasn't in session at the time, made a command decision. Alexander Hamilton, so that was the Treasury Secretary at the time, he justified it in like a letter, called it quote unquote explanations, right? This is all the way back in 1795, sort of this conversation started. Thomas Jefferson is another example, 1807. He authorized the Army and the Navy for war preparations against England, our old nemesis, after a British ship attacked the USS Chesapeake in 1807. You still mad about that? I'm still mad about the taxes, frankly. That's not completely behind me quite yet. Unbelievable. Just robbery. Robbery, Joe.
It's theft.
Lincoln had something like this too. Another thing, so that's kind of one kind of series of example. Another thing that the executive branch would do is that they would retain like public monies, they would call it. So you can imagine proceeds from customs or land sales to augment their budgets. And this kind of gave agencies their own slush fund. So, maybe imagine if today some agency was charging fees if you wanted to get your passport renewed or whatever, and they would use that money generated from those fees to spend however else they wanted. And that kind of undermined Congress's power of the purse. Congress didn't really appreciate that too much. Another thing they did was just kind of the Army would use appropriations meant for one thing and just redirect it to something else. Another pretty common thing, the executive agencies would go around signing contracts without sufficient appropriations, and then it would kind of force Congress after the fact to appropriate it. Elsewise, the U.S. doesn't pay its bills, so the U.S. is sort of, you're forced to pay. Congress would be dealt with a pretty big reputational hit to the U.S. So one of the big examples has to do with the Navy Department in 1870, where they, I think, obliged funds that were like double what had been available. And Congress called this a coercive deficiency. You sort of like force their hand. You spend the money, and then you sort of force, mom and dad to pay for it. Post office did the same thing. The Postmaster General were claiming contracts that would exhaust all of the appropriations by like April. So they would come back, they would, Postmaster General would be like, all right, fine, cancel the contracts, but that means no more mail for you after April, right? And Congress, again, didn't really like that. So, throughout this whole time, Congress is dealing with this stuff. And so what is a legislator going to do? They're going to legislate. And so there's just a series of these through like 1800s 1809, they passed the purpose statute. So appropriations now had to be used for their intended purpose. There was one in 1820, Adequacy of Appropriations Act. So like no contract could be made unless authorized by law or under an appropriation. Another one in 1849, Miscellaneous Receipts Statute. This is the one where, you know, if an agency somewhere earns money from fees or whatever, it can't be kept at the agency. It's got to be deposited back at Treasury, right? 1870. So this is the big one. Congress passed the first Anti-Deficiency Act, which prohibited spending in excess of appropriations. So why am I mentioning all this? Like, why am I talking about all this in the context of government shutdowns? It's because in 1980, so about 100 years later, the Attorney General was asked to give an opinion of like what happens if Congress doesn't pass a bill. What are we supposed to do? They don't pass the budget. And the Attorney General at the time pointed to this act, the one in 1870, and they were the one and said, my read of this means you got to shut down the government. In this way, the laws that were put in place to stop the executive branch from overspending is also what is causing these like government shutdowns, right? And I think it's kind of funny how, you know, Congress keeps battening down the hatches on sort of what is and is not okay for the executive to spend, and it's kind of hit this little unforeseen consequence, which is like if Congress can't get its act together, then it's got this kind of political tool to just shut down the government.
There's all these rules in place, but at the end of the day, it's still the executive. And certainly Trump, he operates at that edge all the time. He kind of, you know, does what he wants and worries about the consequences later.
Okay. I was wondering where you're going with that. Not too bad. I thought you were going to say, well, it is the executive and the president should just have all the power and do whatever they want.
No. It's like, no. You always got to live life on the edge a little bit. You know, it's like, yeah, they
push it.
That's where law. Yeah, that's where history is written. You know, on the margins there.
Yeah. I mean, that's like a fair point. I mean, just in context, like this sort of budget stuff and what the president can and can't spend money on, this has been going on since before.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the Constitution was even ratified. One of the arguments that I thought was really interesting, though, is this idea that the power of the purse is a power of Congress, when it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. So, like, let me tell you what I mean by that. So Article 1, Section 8 lays out the powers of Congress. That's when it goes line by line, like what it can do. But if you look at it, the power of the purse, like what I read to you, it's not in there. It's in the next one. It's in the next section, Section 9. And those are explicitly putting down the limits of Congress. And I think one of the kind of point that these like congressional lawyers were making over the centuries is that the point is not so much that Congress, you know, has all the power. It's just, I think, saying that Congress cannot go around like writing checks whenever to whomever, however it wants. It has to go through this difficult lawmaking process. Like spending money should be difficult because making law is difficult. And so in this vein, it's interpreted that the spirit of the clause, it's argued again, that the Congress really should be responsible in its spending. It should be difficult to spend money.
Seems reasonable.
So that's kind of the tone. And guess who, you know, comes around and totally shifts the conversation? Nixon. So Nixon comes along.
1980.
Right? Yeah, right. Yeah, Nixon comes along, kind of upends kind of this whole thing, and he didn't spend some money and said, you know, F you, I'm not spending this money. But like there's no faster way, I think, for somebody to exercise an indignant authority over you than by ignoring or disrespecting you. So we covered in like detail a while back. This was like back in February or something. We covered the Impoundment Control Act, and that was the whole thing about, you know, saying that you had to spend the money that we appropriated. The tone has definitely changed. Do you know what I mean? And like fast forward to today, my read of the current dynamics that's happening between certainly the executive and the legislative branch is the executive is trying to get a control on spending. Tell me if you disagree with this. But, you know, the president, in my view, is trying to like curb spending. I mean, that budget guy Voight is just, again, my read is trying to cut
Yeah.
spending, and the legislator is just forcing. It's like, no, you have to spend it, and coverage of it is sort of around that. It's like, no, the president cannot not spend this money. It's kind
Yeah.
of flipped.
It's very odd because, like, the key thing is, just like in the present today, this COVID era Obamacare rebate or something like that. They basically want to keep the extraordinary measures in place indefinitely now. It's you have like not only do you have to spend this, you have to overspend this under extremely emergency conditions indefinitely. And yeah, Trump and the Republicans, no, this has to expire. It was meant to be temporary in the first place.
Is it? I wanted to look a lot closer as to what like the demands were, and I even at one point pulled up the bill that the Democrats tried to get through, the one that supposedly had an extra trillion or whatever dollars, and I didn't dollars in Medicare spending, but I think it was just trying to reverse some of the things that were passed in the H1 bill, which we covered here in some depth. So I don't know exactly. I wish I knew a little bit more about this before I opined on exactly like what they're trying to get at.
They just made the criteria much stricter on who is eligible for those benefits.
Right. Yeah. That $1 trillion number is like it's just a huge estimate.
Yeah, but even still, it's like the cuts, they were like huge, like a massive amount of carve out. Like we looked at it on screen. There was like 3 pages long of like the exceptions to people that are not subject to the work requirement. And it was like any kind of mild physical or mental ailment. It really seemed like quite reasonable.
So before we get to that, I want to sort of give you my theory. Why did the tone shift so much, I guess, from Congress? From like, get your stuff together, don't spend, to you have to like spend it. So the first place I started looking was Eisenhower's farewell speech. So this is like a super famous speech. Everyone's heard of it. I never actually listened to it before. And I did that this time around. We'll put in a couple clips because I think that's cool. But there was that. And then I think a combination of that, and in particular, the WW2 tax increases. That's what I think. And so to the speech, so he warned, America, the military industrial complex, everyone knows about that. But there's a lesser known thing that he warned about, and that's what he called the quote unquote, the scientific technological elite, which he said are going to take over the universities. So he said, government money would become, quote, virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity.
The fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
So in my mind, this is something what I might dub, or maybe it's been called sort of the university industrial complex. The fact that universities just get an incredible amount of money from the government through like this grant system, which I think is like a total scam. I was shocked when I heard like what percentage of a grant goes to the university and what actually goes to the research. Do you know what it is? Joe, I have a number in your head. What do you think that number should be? I
think I know a number for like nonprofits is something like low teens or something percent actually goes to some effort, and everything else is admin. So university, I would imagine somewhere around there.
I think it's like 60% goes to the university. That's okay. I heard that from like a pretty trustworthy source, like people who are professors.
That's actually pretty good then.
I remember when I was listening, like they were leading up to this, I forget what it was, but I remember I had a number in my head when I heard about, what percent goes to the university. The first number I thought would be, I don't know, 10%, 5%, right? And then when they came out and they said 60% of the grant goes to the university, I was shocked. Like, that's messed up.
Yeah.
That's
Less than
totally
half is
messed up.
actually serving its intended purpose.
Yeah. In that same speech, he talked about that. And another thing that he talked about that I didn't really appreciate or I didn't know about was he warned against our borrowing too much money. Although he didn't say that directly. He said,
another factor in maintaining balance involves the element of time. As we peer into society's future, we, you and I, and our government must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the precious resources of tomorrow.
That's borrowing. That's what what else could that be? And so, like, the next thread or the next sort of line I went down sort of in this sort of research was, trying to figure out why, of all the things that he could have talked about, it was like a 10-minute speech. It's very short. Of all the things that he could have talked about, why did he land on that? And I imagine there must have been there's some things that have happened to him sort of over that time. And, I think he was just having persistent battles with the Pentagon for years and years over budgets. So, like, he repeatedly sought to restrain military expenditures, but was not successful. And I think it was the Air Force in particular. That's what I heard about. And even almost like 10 years prior to that. So in 1953, he talked about how a bomber, like a new Air Force bomber, would cost the same as a brick school in over 30 cities, same as 2 electrical power plants, same as 2 fully equipped hospitals, or like 50 miles of concrete highway. Right? And he did the same thing.
Yeah.
He talked about fighter planes and destroyers, and you could spend it on a bomber or you could spend it on like schools.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he was coming, obviously very extraordinary circumstances at the time, almost kind of a little bit of a parallel today. You had World War II, you had such extreme spending, but he recognized that this can't go on like this forever. Kind of like with COVID, we saw 5 years ago now, this extreme spending. And many politicians today are just fighting as hard as they can to just make these extraordinary expenditures permanent.
Yeah. No, very prescient, I think. And it was made possible by, World War II, in a way. And in particular, the taxes that were brought in to pay for it. Those taxes that were brought in and never went back down after the war, which we also talked about here. Like, that's a wild graph to see it spike up, and you're like, guys, relax, calm down. It's just for the war. After that, you'll go, and it just doesn't go back down. It's not how these things work. And so, now the amount of money that Congress allocates is insane, right? If you really think about it, the amount of money that flows through just that tiny little geographic spot, a little speck called Washington, D.C.
You just need the teeniest, tiniest sliver of any kind of fraud scrap you can pick up, and it could be millions of dollars.
Yeah, I was thinking earlier today how they gave, they asked for that rescission bill. Remember that? Like, President Trump sent back and asked for like $9 billion off, $2 billion of which was for PBS and sort of the public broadcasting and all that. And we're like, oh, $9 billion, why even bother? But it's like, that's like serious money.
Yeah.
It's a penny.
Yeah, put it that way. Like, how many schools could that build? How many hospitals could that build?
But the thing is, they're not even like spending it or want to spend it on hospitals and stuff. It's just not to pay interest, which is just like,
well, yeah, today. Yeah.
Yeah. How many hospitals could $1 trillion in interest payments get? Like, this is just what the shackles look like. I'm not going to like go down this. Okay. Okay.
It's true.
Hold me back. Take a breath.
Calm down, Luke. We got tariffs coming in now. $4 trillion next 10 years.
Can't get over it, man. Because if you don't get your house in order, everything else stops. It's just like the number, everything else comes after that, I think. Tell me if I'm wrong, but like, all these special social programs, they don't go if you don't have any money. Healthcare programs, they don't work if you don't have any money. The military doesn't work if you don't have any money. right? Right? Let's talk about like this government's shutdown. What are the forces at play? How do you think this is going to end? My current framework is, I think, in addition to the military industrial complex, and then the university industrial one, we also have the healthcare, I think, industrial complex. Any industry which is, just gets a massive amount of money from the government and they're just deeply interwoven, it has like a potential for a industrial complex to arise. And I think the healthcare one is probably sort of the one on the fore here. I think this is, if we wanted to look at the strings, if you will, behind the marionette, I think it's probably going to be the interests in the healthcare industrial complex. So like in my cynical read, and I acknowledge it, it's cynical. Okay. I realize that this is not like the best view of my government, but I think that the Dems under Obama, I would say, became the champions of the healthcare industrial complex. And so I think what they're trying to do now, like the Dems, they're trying to show their donors that they really want to champion their cause. And they're doing this shutdown to appear like good soldiers. But I don't think they really want to do this at the core. I would also argue that the Dems under Biden, and maybe even before that, became champions of the military industrial complex. And I think that's most evidenced by Dick Cheney, Mr. MIC himself, supporting Harris. You remember that? People were like shocked by that.
Oh, yeah.
But it made like total sense to me. I mean, he is military industrial complex like personified in sort of my view, right? And he was like, I'm all for Harris.
Like I think it all started with Liz Cheney because she was always very anti-Trump, very vocally, very anti-Trump, like, ever since he came about pretty much. And like when I remember hearing about this, it felt like she was just trying to make a name for herself. I don't know why she did it. I don't know anything about her, but it was just like a weird thing. I remember that because Democrats were trying to like brag about, look, we've got the Cheneys.
Right.
It's not really the flex you think it is.
The funniest thing that came out of this was definitely the memes around Dick Cheney and like that joy they were trying to push. You remember that whole vibe they were trying to push on? And there's a picture of, like, Dick Cheney like in front of a mic like this, and it just had like joy in like pink letters at the bottom. That was the funniest thing. Anyway, so I don't think the Dems have a stomach for this. I would give it like 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. They just got to go long enough, to demonstrate to the I'm sorry, like their donors, that they're serious.
Yeah, I mean it's all just a total game at this point. It's all just a political game.
Yeah. So today is I'm going to guess mid-October. We're on October 2nd as we're filming this.
It's either going to last a couple days. I feel like if it stretches into the weekend past this, that window's closed. Because the previous time this happened, it was like 5 weeks, I think. Back in like the turn of 2019.
I think the longest one was 2018, 2019.
Yeah.
And that was over the Trump border wall. But then the other thing, if I were Voight, right, I think a lot of this, it hinges on whether or not the president can fire government employees permanently during a shutdown. Like MSNBC in the left wing says that he can't, but I'm not so sure. I don't think anyone's like super sure. And like for Voight, he might be in there just being like, let's go for a reduction in force, which you see some around. You basically just fire permanently a whole bunch of people and then just stop paying for stuff altogether. Like you just do these, let's just do the spending cuts right now. Hey, you wrote the rules. You wrote the rules, and you were just like, we can't spend money on any of this, so we're just not going to. And the goal here would be just to force a lawsuit. Have somebody who sue you. Okay, they're getting drafted up as we speak. I'm like, so somebody somewhere is suing them, and get it to the whenever there's two branches yelling at each other, you go to the third. So you go to the judiciary, go to the Supreme Court, and get a view on whether or not during a shutdown, the president can just start slashing the underlying structure, people, grants, whatever. And then the goal of that would be if, the Supreme Court comes back and says that they can, then I'm going to go ahead and guess And we're thinking a couple moves ahead in this chessboard. But if you can fire people permanently during shutdowns, I think there are going to be a lot fewer shutdowns. And maybe Trump can then play like the next card, which is to get what he really wanted, which is a change in the law regarding the ceiling altogether. He wants to get rid of the debt ceiling altogether. And he might like be on a path. He and Voight and that team, the budget team or whatever, might be trying to put themselves on a path to do that. So they're going to try to inflict probably as much pain and spending cuts as possible, legal or not, force the lawsuit, argue it at the Supreme Court. Yeah, he's kind of got an advantage. He's got like home court advantage at the Supreme Court right now, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So that would be my guess as the play. That's what I would try to do.
Say that again, though. You said he wants to get rid of the debt ceiling, so he's going to withhold spending to push that cause.
Well, the line of thought. So he definitely wants to get rid of the debt, like this whole dance that they play. Like the reason why there's like a debt ceiling and they have these shutdowns and you're going to like pass the debt, you can get rid of that.
But this event right now is different than a debt ceiling event. This is why this is a little strange. The big beautiful bill just raised the debt ceiling by $6 trillion to like 36 to 41 trillion right now. Like we're well inside of the debt ceiling today. This is like a purely administrative thing almost, in that Congress has to recertify spending plans that have already been made or something like that. But this is absolutely not a debt ceiling event. And that's like one of the things that, just in my day-to-day at work, this is something that we're concerned with, because around debt ceiling events, there's the huge risk is around Treasury securities for a U.S. default. Right now, there's no risk of a U.S. default because, number one, we're not at the debt ceiling. Like we just raised it and we're well inside of it because it was just raised. And then on a shutdown, government servicing of debt is an essential activity. Issuing treasuries, meeting treasury payment obligations. So this current thing that we're under today, there's no relationship to government default or lack of spending capacity available. This isn't even about that.
Right. Okay. I didn't really appreciate that.
This is like a game of chicken right now. Like who's gonna swerve first? They have to recertify a bill or something like that, or pass a continuing resolution, or
yeah, I think that's what they were going for. They were going for originally in I think this would have been mid-September. The House passed, the Republicans passed a continuing bill. They would just be like, it would fund the government for another month while they negotiate further. But that got knocked down in the Senate. And then the Democrats put forward their own, bill. And that was the one that had all the extra sort of spending in it. And that got shut down. And that's where Voight comes out and says, like, this is a non-starter. Hey, so it's Luke in the editing room. I just wanted to say that roughly the next 20 minutes is really an unfocused romp through a bunch of half-baked ideas. We really weren't very familiar with the details. That's my fault. And no amount of editing could fix this. So I've decided to go ahead and just cut it all out, which is why this is going to end kind of abruptly. In the meantime, I'm going to do a little more research, hopefully come up with some more focused and supported views. And then maybe if this topic comes up again, then we can talk about it then. But sorry about that. But I think there will be another opportunity to talk about it. Anyway, thanks again for watching. I'm going to go right up to the sign off. Well, that's all I had for you, Joe. Everyone else at home, hope you enjoyed it. This has been another episode of the Root of All Evil podcast. I'm Luke.
I'm Joe. Luckily, we finished just before your computer died.
Oh, yeah, right. Thanks for tuning in.
See you next
week. Bye.